Hello and welcome to Bridging Minds podcast, episode 2. I'm Sarah Goff, your host and founder of Bridging Minds Collective, where we don't just talk politics, we talk about how to talk politics. And what does that mean? Well, how to best articulate your points of views, often when you're with other people who don't agree with them, and encourage them to listen and even begin to understand where you're coming from. It's something I think we all want, and that is to be heard and to be understood. So today we are joined with David, our co-host, David Brown. Hi, David.
Hi, Sarah.
Good to see you again. And Joy Justice. Joy is from our Bridging Minds group as well as David. And Joy is originally from LA, correct? And you are joining us today from the East Coast.
Yes.
And good. And you're known in the group for being very direct and clear, which is super helpful and something I think we admire. And I think that speaks to also your background in human resources and the experiences you've had with activism and working on campaign trails. So that brings a lot to us, and we're really grateful and excited that you're here.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Excited to be here.
Yeah, totally. And David, you want to just tell real quick about your screen background, just so people aren't wondering.
So I have real sensitivity to light, and unfortunately, to accommodate me that way, I can't have too much light illuminating my face. So I guess I'm just a shadowy character here, but sorry about this.
But voice is what matters. And
okay, yeah, just listen to the voice and imagine a bright person.
Yes, for sure. And let's just, I want to just do a quick recap of our last episode, because this is really a part 2. We talked about who should and should not be a part of conversations that pertain to race and discrimination, and why. And it's not just to be a part of them, but actually who should lead or weigh in on these conversations. And it was really interesting to talk about that. And that's on our website at www.bridging-minds.com. That's bridging-minds.com. And you can check that out. But today we are going to talk about exploring the question, how do we deal with the uncomfortable feelings that come up when talking about sensitive topics such as race and discrimination. These feelings are strong, and they often guide us in ways that make us avoid conversations that really would be great to have. And there's also a second part of that. Is it the responsibility of the other party to lessen your uncomfortable feelings, or to assist you around them, and or assist you through them? Or is it something that you can control or try to work through yourself? So we're going to talk about that. And I have a personal experience that I can share as well that's rather heavy, but really gets to the point where I avoided a conversation just to avoid feeling uncomfortable. But I'll get to that later. Joy, how are you feeling about this topic? What do you want to say about it?
Well, I mean, it's a very broad topic, but also a very, as you stated, emotional topic, I think, for most people, because there is a level of being uncomfortable and it's pushing you out of comfort zones, basically. So we're talking about people who may be interested in, I hate using the word social justice, but in social justice and activism and things like that. But once you realize that it's not ambiguous, but it literally is your day-to-day experiences, that's where the challenges come in. Then you are being challenged, maybe possibly in the workplace. You are being challenged in relationships. You can be challenged in peer relationships, because once you take on the mindset that you really want to step into that arena, being uncomfortable is the norm for a lot of us. So it's not necessary, and there is the component of confrontation, and that, for most people, is extremely uncomfortable. I know very few people who enjoy the confrontation.
Right. And the goal often in our discussion group, where there's a variety of topics happening at all times of day, is to turn conflict into good conflict rather than high conflict.
Yeah.
And
it's also controlled conflict, however. Whereas you're doing so in a day-to-day setting, it's not controlled, because you have someone that's right there. So it's not something where you can read it and then return to it later, maybe when you're in a more or less emotional state, or they're in a less emotional state, or both parties have had an opportunity to think a bit more clearly about what they're trying to communicate. Again, for all things that's more of a controlled setting. And so once you step into the real world, it takes on a whole different connotation and experience.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. You raise good points of good strategies of stepping back. And sometimes that's when you are face to face, it is harder to do. Of course, in an online discussion group, you can just walk away from it much easier. Excellent point. And something you said while we were talking in preparation for tonight, that I snatched up immediately. I just thought this is a brilliant idea, quote. And that is, when we avoid the things that are uncomfortable, we are living with blinders on. And then we can become comfortable living with blinders, which, speaking for myself, life is too just amazing and full of people to learn from. And I look at every opportunity, every person I talk to as a data point of opportunity for learning and to feed my soul and my mind. So I don't want to live with blinders on. I want to figure out how to manage these feelings, and so they don't, in the moment when I'm put on the spot, make me shy away from. And what are these feelings? Like guilt and frustration. They're tough. They scare us away. Even just sympathy, or feeling like you don't understand something, you're not qualified to talk about it, and then you never begin if you start with that. But David, how about what is your feeling about living with blinders, and what way? I know you love learning, and you really embrace learning in the most active way possible. I see it just in how you engage with people in a very open and honest way. What are your feelings on this, and what strategy do you think you use?
Well, I think that I really believe that we can learn enough from other people if we are really interested and open to hearing about their feelings, if that's what they want to share, their thoughts, if that's what they want to share. And I think that there's never really complete understanding, but when the listener is really attempting just to understand what is coming across, and to make that process as comfortable for the other person as possible. And it can be uncomfortable for if let's say I meet a person of color, and then, as we were saying a few minutes ago, face to face is more difficult, because there's body language that we want to be presenting ourselves nicely, and there's the tone of voice. All these are opportunities to actually make the experience better if we can just somehow be comfortable about this, be respectful, and what I want to do in that situation is I want the other party to feel validated that I am, as soon as I'm understanding something, I want to verify that I'm understanding that. I want to say it back to them a slightly different way and check, do I understand that? Something I feel is accomplished if I just succeed in conveying to them what I think they are coming, where they're coming from, and if they say yes, that's the case. If not, then we can find out just what needs to be clarified. I really believe there's so much to learn from a really constructive conversation like this, and really from active listening where I want to learn, I am open to learn, that sort of thing. Am I making sense?
Yeah. How do you think about that, Joy? What thoughts are going through your mind?
I completely agree. I may defer on certain points because when people are sharing their experiences and their life, because this is, for some people, this is a learning exercise. For other people, this is their everyday life experience. So, of course, the emotional quotient and content of the dialogue or whatever that may be may be very dramatically, well, excuse me, may be different. And not to get waylaid by that, because I don't think that any minority, in speaking about whatever challenges their community is facing, is then responsible for someone else's comfort level. That is not the goal of any activist that I'm familiar with, and I've worked with plenty. Where the goal is to move beyond that. I mean, if you are comfortable, many times it's because you feel safe, and there's not any true actual movement happening. Social justice activism is not about being comfortable. It's well outside of the norms in our current society. And if we look at history, comfort was never a part of change. I think one of the things that I said is change is probably one of the most unwelcome visitors outside of truth, of course. Those two topics tend to be the most difficult for people to embrace, because if you're hearing a truth that doesn't necessarily jive with your dogma that you have, then that's challenging. It doesn't make it any less true, however. So but I don't necessarily agree with taking the emphasis off the importance of a movement to make other people comfortable, because that's just not really, in my mindset, in my experience, comfort is just not really a part of the equation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's almost in knowing that it's going to take a certain degree of confidence and a certain degree of open-mindedness to say, I'm going to allow myself to be challenged here, because that is how I'm going to work through these feelings of discomfort.
Right.
And I wonder if even acknowledging the feelings, that if it might help to say, okay, this topic is not something I'm used to talking about. I'm not exposed to a lot of people of color. I don't have a broad understanding. I know I need to read more books. I'd like to. I've seen a documentary. Just to tell them where you're coming from.
Right.
That might just allow some breathing space.
I believe so, because what I will say is I've had those dialogues. There was a gentleman that I met from, and I think we may have talked about this, that I met from South America, and literally he had no exposure to African Americans. So I was like the first African American person that he had some sort of extended exposure to. And he kind of glommed onto me, and I really didn't understand why, but he was just like, you're just so nice. And it's just not what I expected, because his visuals back from where he is from did not support, I guess I did not support the stereotype that he expected. And so we had a really honest conversation, because I was just like, what is your deal? Basically.
Right.
And so he shared me what his deal was. And we did have a dialogue, and it wasn't about making him comfortable. I think we were actually in a work setting, So his interaction with me, and I was human resources at that time, but interaction with me was based on that. And then it became more social, of course,
Right.
because we're all working together. So, I mean, and I have a million of those stories. And it's just really weird to kind of constantly be in a position to have to justify yourself, your humanity, and to be seen as, an oddity, something completely out of whatever the norm is, if that makes sense.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's interesting, because what I like about that story is that he seemed to come to it with excitement. And maybe if you could channel your nervousness or your anxiety into, wait, this is a cool opportunity for me to learn from this person, for whether if it's the first, you really have been in a culture that has been limited, and you're finally getting the opportunity to talk to someone of color, to pick each other's brains and to say, open my mind, or just to, I think, I don't know, he, from the way you tell it, he seems to come to it with an innocence that is
Yeah.
kind of refreshing, and might be a nice way to try to approach some conversations.
And I think that was probably why I was a lot more tolerant because the, as you put it, the innocence, it really was there. I mean, it was a genuine kind of like, wow, for him moment. And from there, he went on to develop other friendships. I think that he may not have necessarily stepped out of his comfort zone, because his family was, all South American, and he was here in the States, and it was just, it was really interesting. Now, that is unique in the sense that he was not American. It's a little more difficult for me to have the same type of tolerance for people who live in the United States with African Americans, with the Hispanic community, with whatever community. I mean, we're all here. The information is there. At certain points, I mean, I almost feel like if you still have super question marks, I wonder how much effort you're actually making to break out of that comfort zone.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's an honest dialogue, because as for me, as an African American, and you can probably talk to people from different races, we know a lot about white people because white people are the default in the United States.
Right.
But it is interesting to have the same types of dialogues with a person who happens to be Caucasian, and they almost treat you like, or they behave in the same way that this young man from South America did. And I'm like, I do not understand this. You work with African Americans, you pass them on the streets, they're everywhere.
Right.
We are everywhere. We're a part of the country. We're Americans. So that within itself becomes a frustration. And I think that's where my tolerance becomes a lot less, let's just say.
Yeah. I hear you. Yeah, I think that's maybe even a problem to look at in our society, where we do have the exposure available, but it's very easy to get caught in your one community, your own circles, and yet, so I can see how Americans would find themselves in a position of, how do I branch out? How do I begin to meet people of color and to start the conversation? So everyone's starting somewhere. David, what do you think? What do you think about like the starting point, or how to enter into the discomfort, or how about your circles? Have you had exposure?
Well, let me first make sure I'm understanding Joy. I think what I want to see if this is right. There are a lot of experiences that Black people have that too many of them are unpleasant in interactions between Blacks and and white people or other people, but also just in the life, there is much in the life of a Black person that I hear is difficult and not always well understood by other people. So I think what you mean when you say that you don't want like the issue of discomfort to be maybe if Black people are too concerned about the comfort of other people, they may not be saying things that they need to say that will inevitably make a lot of people uncomfortable. There are truths that need to be communicated, and it's the responsibility for other people to deal with that discomfort, to learn from that. Is that roughly where that's coming from? Am I understanding you correctly?
Yes, I do believe that you understood or took the gist of it away. Yes.
Okay. Okay. And your question, Sarah, was what? I'm sorry.
Well, how, just in your circles, your community, what are ways that you are looking to branch out? I mean, joining Bridging Minds was one,
Yes.
because and now you're exposed to, thousands of other people of different backgrounds. But is there any way? Do you feel that you've lived a sheltered life and it's difficult for you to move out of it?
Well, at this time, the new people I meet, they're all online. I have had caregivers who were people of color, and that was an interesting experience to try and understand where they're coming from and what, how to have a really positive relationship with the caregiver. But right now online, a lot of what I have been doing has been more in the realm of I guess talking about ideas, and sadly, there are not large numbers of people of color in the groups that I've been participating in. Whenever I'm in one of these participating in one of these conversations, one of the things I want to do is I want the members to feel as welcome as possible to express their views, and to feel that it's okay to have things that will be uncomfortable for other people, to be welcome to say things that are candid. And whenever I see something that, if I agree with 60% of what I've heard, don't ask me to measure it, but I'll want to acknowledge certainly the part I agree with, and then maybe if it makes sense, to explore the other parts, but certainly to acknowledge what I agree with. I think that's a starting point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, acceptance then is important to get people to open up. Then at least you know where you're starting from, and you can start to work with that person and engage from that point. Because you really, like you said, Joy, you come in at different points or different learning curve. People are on different learning curves, and sometimes it is hard to. It really takes an open mind on both parts to say, okay, this is where you're coming from, this is where I'm coming from. Let's see if we can be good listeners and open-minded enough to guide each other through this. And maybe I have a fear of misspeaking, and so I would hate for that to keep me from speaking, because then I'll never get past that. So there will be mistakes, and acknowledge that, and point out mistakes in a kind way. My story is, and you put it well, Joy, you said, what do you accept in your own kitchen? Well, I had an experience where someone in my kitchen, as we're cooking, made a very prejudiced comment in front of my children. And it was really uncomfortable for me to hear that, because I care a lot about the person who made the comment. And my first thought is, I don't want to make her feel, I don't want to reprimand her. I don't want to call her out and jump into some high conflict situation. And she's quite vocal, so it likely would have escalated quickly. So I didn't say anything, and then later called my kids over privately and said, that was an out of line comment, and actually it was a huge generalization, and for that reason is false. And I hope you recognize that, or you want to talk about it. And it still bothers me because I didn't show the best example would be to here's an uncomfortable situation, go through it, go into it, do your best, try to do it without offending, try to make it as positive as possible, or acknowledge the uncomfortableness of it, but at least address it. At least say, that is actually not the way we think here. And are you realizing, that what you're saying, because it's not true. It can't possibly be true that all people act this way. There are consequences to not using your voice. And that's really what we're here, to help everyone to use their voice so they don't have to live with the consequences of regret or living in blinders, which I wouldn't recommend for anybody.
And I'm going to interject here. Yeah. I think sometimes what it is the level of fear, again, the confrontation, but this is your personal life, so and when you shared that with me over the phone, like I said, I'm not judging you about what was said or what wasn't said, and I think you were pretty clear that I wasn't judging you, because that is your household. I don't live in your household. So, and she is someone that sounds like you may have had a long-term relationship that does overlap into personal. Again, this is where these moments become real, and it moves out of the ambiguous nature of dialogue and free-flowing ideas to, oh, okay, so I actually kind of felt like I needed to say something, but I'm not sure what I needed to say, or wasn't comfortable saying it because I didn't want the pushback. I think fear is a big thing, and those consequences work both ways. Whether you say something, there's a consequence. If you don't say anything, there is a consequence. So, and people fear both sides of that equation.
Mm-hmm. And it's a split second. It's a moment where your brain says address or don't address, and then you feel like that moment is like slips by, and yeah. But that happened before I have really focused on accepting discomfort and focused on embracing good conflict, and try to really take the skills of listening, or this tone, or just the idea, just knowing that acknowledging discomfort helps. Because then you're saying, okay, I know it's going to be uncomfortable, but go there. You can do it. You can get through that. That's what you really want to do. You really want to set the right example here and address something that's totally unfair and shouldn't have been said. And that's not our household. So why would I just let that go by? Yeah. It's a learning process for sure. But I think we need to wrap it up because we are running over a little bit on our time. Thank you, Joy, and thank you, David.